Hello, seventh graders. Most of the time I say good morning because usually when I make this video, it's in the morning. But I bet you're doing your homework in the evening because that's what seventh graders usually do. So, good evening. I hope that you're having a beautiful week. And I hope that you had enjoyed our video last week, kind of talking about Adam and Eve. Well, today we move into history proper. We remember today we're going to start talking about something called the patriarchs. And I want you to know who these people are. But to be able to understand who the patriarchs are, you first got to think a little bit about history. And when I talk about history, I mean ancient history, like the longest time ago that you can possibly think. So think for a minute. What's the longest time ago that you can possibly think of? Well, usually we think of the very beginnings of civilization, like the very first cities in the world. I hope in history class you might have actually learned about this, but there's a place called Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent, that was between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and this area was where the very first cities in the whole world were created. It's an incredible place. It's in modern day Iraq, and which is in the Middle East, and from there, this little itty bitty pocket of cities, from there comes civilization throughout the world. But I want you to imagine for a moment what it must have been like everywhere else in the world. I mean, excuse me for a moment. I mean, these first cities weren't very big. They grew big. Oh, now I have to sneeze. I hate it when that happens. Whew. Oh, there, I feel better. You ever get that where you have a sneeze and it just won't come out? Anyway, well, there we are. I've gotten my sneeze out. I want you to imagine what it must have been like if you didn't live in those cities, right? Like if you lived in a place outside the city, what would that have been like? What would your life have been like? Now, the place we're going to be talking about is in the desert. So I want you to imagine that you live in the desert, not around any cities, all by yourself, or maybe with your family. What do you think your life would be like? Go ahead. Well, I bet you probably talked about a lot of things. You might have talked about the kind of food you would eat. You might have talked about what your normal day would have been like. You might have talked about all sorts of things. But what I bet you didn't think about was how scared you would be. Because we live in a world where there are policemen. We live in a world where there are firemen and where there's a government and with armies that keeps all the bad people away. I mean, we live a really, really safe life. But back then there was no police. That hadn't been invented yet. There were no armies. That hadn't been invented yet. That would come soon enough. There were only tribes of people, families, big families. So how would you feel safe? What would you do to feel safe? I mean, when you went to bed at night, how do you know somebody wouldn't come steal all your things? Nobody had ever heard of the Ten Commandments. Nobody had ever heard of any of the moral rules or the laws that we have now. So it was very normal for people to steal and to kill and to hurt each other. And even more terrible things than that, like slavery, right? I mean, these kind of things were very, very normal. And if you were found alone and somebody caught you, they might tie you up and sell you as a slave because they could. And who would stop them? That's really a scary world to live in. Very scary. So how would you feel safe? Well, what you would do is you would stay close to your family. And I don't mean like your mom and your dad and your brothers and your sisters. I mean your whole family, like your aunts and your uncles and your great aunts and your great uncles and their kids and their so you'd have tons of cousins, and you would all stay close together and you would all protect each other because it was one big group, right? and there's always safety in numbers. So you would have all these people, and they would travel together, um, sometimes as a tribe, and sometimes as a clan, and sometimes just as a regular family, but a big family, the whole thing together. Well, the patriarchs were the people who was in charge of a family. So if you had a family and your family was very big, there would be somebody who would be in charge, who would say, okay, well, we're going to go this way and we're going to go that way. And this person would be the one that would kind of keep everybody together and keep everybody safe, and would also handle the business for everybody who was there, so that everybody would be on the same page and we'd all be in the same heart and be doing the same thing. And this kept people safe. That's what it was about, right? Well, today we're going to start learning about three specific patriarchs in one specific family, and how these men um, really allowed God to move in their life and in the lives of their whole families. Um, the first one we're going to talk about is a man named Abram. Now, later on, God's going to change his name to Abraham. Now, I'm going to start using Abraham now so that we don't get confused. But in the beginning, we can remember that his name was Abram, and God changed his name. But Abraham lived in a one of these small towns in Mesopotamia, a little town called Ur. They didn't have fancy names then, just Ur, right? So Abraham was from Ur, but God called him out. God called him and said, Abraham, I want you to leave the city, and I'd like you to go where I tell you to go. I'd like you to follow me and see where I lead you. I imagine this must have been really scary for Abraham. I mean, he had a wife, Sarah, and her original name was Sarai, and God changed her name too. But we'll call her Sarah. He had a wife named Sarah, and he had all of his family with him, all the people that he knew and loved, and he had his servants and everybody who was part of his family. And they had to leave the city because Abraham said God talked to him. I imagine they were feeling kind of weird about that. But they trusted their patriarch, they trusted their father, they trusted Abraham. And so Abraham took them off into the desert. And you can imagine them all traveling in the desert with camels, with all of their sheep, with all of their tents that they had. And they lived the rest of their lives traveling around in the desert, doing what God called them to do. You see, it took a lot of faith for Abraham to trust God in this. It took a whole lot of faith. And that's why we call Abraham our father in faith. To this day, way over half the world, like just a ton, most the people who call themselves children of Abraham are the major portion of the world. All the monotheists in the world, all the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews, they all believe that Abraham is their father. So Abraham is a pretty darn important guy. And why is he their father? Because he was the first one who had faith in one God. It was Abraham. And so Abraham traveled throughout the countryside with all of his big family and all of his sheep and all of his flocks and they would live kind of like well, Bedouin or gypsies, or they would travel from place to place. They were nomads. And they would go to a place and they would put up all their tents and they would stay there a little while until their sheep had eaten all the grass, and they would move on to the next place. And as they moved around, God guided them. He spoke to Abraham and told him where to go and what to do. And Abraham listened. Now, don't get me wrong. Abraham was not a perfect man. In fact, was a very, very flawed man. Who made lots and lots of mistakes, lots of errors. He wasn't always good, but he did always have faith. Well, I want to share with you a particular story about Abraham. Abraham, see, he was a patriarch. That means he was the father of this larger family, but there was a problem. He wasn't actually a father. He had all these people who were with him, his whole family, but he wasn't a dad. He had no children. Sarah couldn't have children. So he turned to God one day and said, God, what's the point of me doing all of this? Why do you have me traveling around the world doing all of these things when I have no children? You see, Abraham didn't know what the future would hold. He didn't know anything about heaven or he didn't know anything about if he was going to live forever. He just knew that he was going to die one day. And that meant there was no one to take over the family. And so his family would fall apart and would get in arguments and leave each other and would eventually be conquered by thieves, and there'd be nothing left. And that made Abraham very sad. Like his whole life was just going to go away. And so he asked him, God, what's the point of this if I don't have a son? If I don't have a son, why are you leading me around the desert? And God said, you will have a son. You will have a son. In fact, not only will you have a son, you will be the father of many. And Abraham was like, okay. And God said, Abraham, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go, and I want you to get a bunch of different animals, and I want you to cut those animals in half and lay them on the ground in 2 rows, with one half being on one side and one half being on the other side. Kind of a gross thing if you think about it. But Abraham did it. And he stood there and he cut up a cow and a pig and a sheep and a goat and some birds. I mean, everything you could think of. And he put them just like God told him to. But he thought this was really weird. And then as he was standing there, God came to him like a smoke and stood in between the 2 halves of these animals. And there he told Abraham that he will be the father of nations. He told Abraham to look up at the sky and count the stars. And Abraham said, I can't. And he said, your children will be like the stars. And he told Abraham, count the sands on the seashore. And Abraham said, I couldn't, ever. And God said, your children will be like the sands of the seashore. Now, this might seem weird. What's with the animals, right? Well, in those days, remember, there's no police and no laws and no anything. How do you make a deal with somebody? How do you know if you can trust somebody's deal? Well, normally you'd shake hands or something like that. They'd have different kind of rituals like that. But when it came to really important things, what they would do is they would sacrifice an animal, and they would stand in between the animal and they would make the deal right there. And that what they were saying was, if I break my deal, may I be like the animal right here. It's like, I mean it. If I break this deal, may the gods split me in 2, right? And God speaks to Abraham in a way that he'll understand. He shakes hands with him. He says, I'm making you a promise that will last forever. You will be the father, and you will be a great father, a father of many, a father of the world. And you know what? I told you earlier, over half the world, much over half the world, all of those who believe in one God count Abraham as their father. God was not lying, because even now, thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, most of the world are sons of Abraham. But Abraham didn't see that son. He didn't see him. He was already getting very old, and he didn't know if he was ever going to have any kids. And so finally, he got really worried, and he made a big mistake. You see, he knew he didn't have any kids, and so he was really stressed out about it. And finally, his wife said, "Look, I can't have kids, and I'm old now. What am I supposed to do? I'll tell you what. Why don't you have a relationship with my servant, and that way maybe she can bear you a son?" And Abraham says, "Okay." And he has a relationship with Hagar, and she does have a son. His name is Ishmael, and Ishmael is a good boy, and Abraham loves Ishmael, but there gets to be a big problem, and the problem is this: as you can imagine, Sarah gets to be pretty jealous about this. Hagar's very, very proud of herself for being the one who has a son of the patriarch, and she starts throwing it around in Sarah's face. And Sarah was already uncomfortable with this whole situation. And so it got worse and worse and worse until finally Sarah asked Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Imagine that must have broken his heart. He finally has a son. He didn't get that son the right way, but he finally has a son, and he loves his son. But now his wife doesn't want his son around. He doesn't know what to do. He's really worried about it. But God tells him he will take care of Ishmael, and he sends him away. And he does. God takes care of Ishmael. By the way, all the Muslims of the world call Ishmael their father, right? Like he's the that's the important person for all of Islam. Now, after this happens, God comes to visit Abraham in the form of three people. It's kind of a weird thing. Three people come up to him in the desert, and Abraham knows something's different. And so he immediately runs to Sarah and says, Sarah, make some food. We have guests. And he gets the camp ready for them. He sees them coming, and they come up and they spend some time with them, and he can see something is special. Are they angels? What is this? And they look at him and they say, Abraham, surely next time I come and see you in a year's time, you will have a son. And Sarah, who was kind of listening from inside the tent, she heard, Sarah will have a son. And she started laughing. And they heard her. They're like, why are you laughing? And they said, really? I'm really old now. Are you saying that I can have kids out of, I'm really old. There's no way that's not going to happen. But sure enough, Sarah does get pregnant. Sarah has a son. And you know what they name him? They name him Isaac, but do you know what that means? It means to laugh. They named her after Sarah's laughter, and after the laughter and joy that they had finally in their old age of having a son. And Isaac becomes the apple of Abraham's eye. He thinks about nothing in the world but Isaac. He loves this son, and he raises him, and he trains him in everything he knows. And it is absolutely the most wonderful thing in all of his life. And as you can imagine, he's pretty darn excited about the opportunity that he now has. And so now he trusts God. He trusts God completely. God said he was going to have a son, and he had the son. God came to him and told him it would be within a year, and it was within a year. God brought him laughter and joy in his old age. And he was so, so happy and so thankful. And he loved this son. So we're going to learn all about this son, and we'll learn about what their relationship was like, and we'll find out more about these patriarchs. But I wanted you to get the basic idea that Abraham was called to move away from his city and to go off into the wilderness where there was nobody with his family and to protect them, and that God would lead them to where he wanted them to go. But the thing he really wanted was a son. He wanted a future for his family, and it took a long time. But God gave him that son. And that son's name is Isaac. Laughter. I hope you guys have a beautiful week, and I look forward to continuing our story next week. May God bless you.